My name is Andy Savory. I was born in Vancouver, British Columbia, St. Paul's Hospital. I have a brother and a sister, both younger, and we were raised in Nanaimo on Vancouver Island. My parents are now deceased, but their retirement years, they lived on Hornby Island, one of the small islands in the Sunshine Coast here. My childhood was very varied. We had a lot of influences in our lives. My father was quite strongly Anglican, my mother not so strong. I would say our family upbringing was quite spiritual, but not necessarily strongly religious. We went to Christmas prayer probably every year, and often to the midnight mass, which was a lot of fun because we got to stay up really late. Other than that, we sort of followed the texts of the Bible, followed the teachings in the Bible, but not regularly attending at any given church or anything like that. So, my relationship as a Christian with the Bible was not a strong connection. I learned early on, I'm not sure how or who, that the Bible was more of a collection of different authors rather than one thing coming directly from God. It was had many interpretations, you say, and parts of it were missing, and parts of it were in storage and not being used. So I didn't have a really strong connection with the Bible. Our community, the people I hung out with, would call themselves Christian, but they were very much similar to our family, not regularly attending, but, following the precepts, the general precepts of Christianity, of good behavior, as it was, working towards a good civilization. Before I converted, I didn't really have much knowledge at all about Islam. I knew it was one of the major religions, but I had very, very few facts to go on, which was one of the things that made it kind of interesting to explore when I first started to learn about it. Well, when I left Nanaimo and came over to the mainland of British Columbia and worked on my own here for several years, and sort of had a slight disconnect from my family and a real disconnect from my old community. So I was, in a sense, searching for something. I'm not sure what, but I eventually got into contact with some Muslim people and ended up asking them a variety of questions, which led eventually to me taking a course in Islam from the Sunni brothers. And that was very interesting. It was a 10 or 12 week course. And that eventually led to some more intimate sessions with Sheikh Qasim Ali, our sheikh who was here at the Sexsmith site before we had this facility here. And eventually I did my Shahada with him back in the year 2000. I met some people who were good role models, I suppose, of Islam. They're very gentle people and very outgoing, and just by asking some questions through them, that was sort of what got me going on an investigation of Islam, I guess you might say. Yep. No, I would say that the Holy Quran inspired me in that it was a complete work, sort of. It was unbroken up, like the Bible is broken up into all sorts of different authors and sections and things. So I think that the thing about the Quran is its completeness and its sort of obvious, I don't know how to say, flow or continuity was what appealed to me. I came across it through the teachings of the Sunni brothers, and they introduced me to the Quran, and throughout the course that I took, they had many examples from the Quran, and slowly we started to read through it. One of the things that got me intrigued with Islam was associating with the family that I mentioned there. When I started to work at Science World in Vancouver here, I met my now wife's mother, who was working in the gift shop then, and later on her daughter came to work at Science World as well, and the two of us were hired on to work as a part of a 4-person team that toured British Columbia, giving off science shows to small communities all over the province. And during that time, we're talking about everything over the different meals and staying awake on the long drives between communities and all that sort of thing. So Islam was a topic of conversation, and it got me more and more interested in it. So eventually, I started to sort of investigate it on my own. It continued to be interesting, so it was good. In British Columbia at that time, there really wasn't any image of Islam in the media. It wasn't a high point or a low point, or it wasn't part of the sports scene or anything like that. So there's very little media coverage that I recognized as Islamic media coverage back then. Mind you, I didn't pay too much attention to the media. I'm not a television aficionado, so I spent a lot of time in the woods when I was young, and didn't spend much time worrying about the outside world too much. It's more the biological world and the miracles, the interwoven intricacies in the biological world fascinated me. And that's part of my spirituality too. I believe there's a God because of the complexity of our world and the beauty of our world. There's so many things interwoven and interconnected that you cannot even imagine that it could possibly be coincidence. It has to be guided. And so that's where my spirituality sort of comes from. Now, as I said, the media image just wasn't there. There was nobody investigating Islam. There was no reason to. I mean, this is 15, 16, 17 years ago in British Columbia, certainly. And we're not part of America, and we don't really follow the American television patterns too much, I don't think, but, or at least we didn't used to. We do more now, I think. But there was very little information out there. I had to search to find a course on Islam that was open to the public without going to university or something, right? So the Sunni brothers were the only people that had any information out there. And I'm glad that they did. They were very welcoming and very happy to have me there, and it was quite interesting. My early days in Nanaimo, my family is probably, even amongst the Nanaimoites, is probably a fairly open family. We didn't have the concept of racism or thing. We had a lot of different people, and now that I'm older, I can see that my father and mother conspired to bring different people to our kitchen table to have dinner with us. And we had biologists and politicians and all sorts of different people come through the house. My father was a probation officer, and he worked with all different types of people in the community, from the rich to the poor. We had a lot of friends within the First Nations group. Our school ground was very white, not mixed, so there was not any problems that way at all. But I never considered anybody different on the basis of where they came from or what their background was. I was just always interested in meeting up with them and talking to them and finding out their stories. And Nanaimo is a kind of a small community, and it had that flavor for many years, even after I left, but it's getting a bit bigger now. But it was a small Anglo, predominantly white community with a background of First Nations people in it. And the First Nations people were just beginning to come back and reestablish things like their language and their cultural centers, and starting to rebuild from the bad times, I guess, they had gone through with the advent of the white settlers coming into their territory. You have to think of British Columbia as very, very young. I mean, we're only about 150 years old as an incorporated entity as British Columbia. So all of our civilization that we so proudly vaunt is only about 200 years here. And the first 125 years was pretty much based on ignorance, I have to say, I think. And a lot of damage was done to the First Nations peoples here. That is slowly changing, I'm very glad to say. But yeah, It was a small community. People cared about each other. We did a lot of community work. I can remember my mother and father coming home one night covered in soot, charcoal, because they'd been repairing the Scout House, one of the community centers that had accidentally caught fire. And they'd been inside all night scrubbing the walls, and they came home looking like chimney sweeps. But no, we had a lot of community involvement as youth, as kids, and again, I think that was very purposeful on the part of my parents to get us involved in the community and to make us understand that volunteerism was part of what life was about. I've had a very, very gentle transition into Islam compared to some of the stories I've heard where people's families have disowned them and things like that. My family, I think they blinked once, and that was about it. They were totally welcoming any path that I chose to take. They left it up to me, and what I did was fine by them, sort of thing. They were curious, but welcoming to any new conversation, any new point of discussion. So I didn't have any problems with my parents. On the actual day I took the Shahadat, I think it was November 14th in 2000, with Sheikh Qasim Ali, who has, I'm glad to say, become a friend of mine. Although we don't see each other as much as we should. He was very, very kind with me and very understanding and guiding me very carefully and gently along the way, letting me ask any question that I wanted to ask. My friends, again, curiosity, nothing other than curiosity. There was no negative vibe at all that I ever experienced in anybody. So, like I say, I've had a very gentle transition, so it's been very good. The welcoming from the community here was tremendous. Everybody soon knew my name, probably because I was the only white person there, and the only person named Andy, so it wasn't very hard for them to remember my name. My concern was that there was so many Muhammads and Alis that I was never sure of anybody's name for the longest time. But yeah, the earliest memories I have are open welcome. My friends Karar and Mehboob and Mamdou and other people gave me such a warm welcome that it really made a difference. It was very easy to be here with them and be part of the community. You mean not being able to eat ham? No. The difficulties with, there weren't any real difficulties. I never drank anyway, so there was no alcohol. I never did smoke, so there was no cigarettes to worry about. There was, not eating ham and the dietary restrictions have never been a problem. My wife and my mother-in-law are both fantastic cooks, so I get really well fed. The biggest problem is staying slim. But no, I don't think so. It never impacted that way to me. It's just more cerebral. The peace I find with being a Muslim is a very wonderful strength. My first year as a Muslim was a very interesting year. I took my Shahadat. I graduated with my bachelor's from University of British Columbia with my teaching degree. I got married. My wife and I moved into our first apartment together. And I was regularly attending at the mosque. Had a great, as I say, a great welcome there, but very soon felt like I was contributing. There's things that I could do there that I just got involved in the volunteer program quite quickly. One of the first memories I have is going outside to the big trash container there and jumping on the garbage bag so we could get more into it. So all sorts of little jobs I could help out with, and I was very glad to and very welcomed in there. I got my first job the same time, so I became a full-time teacher.